All right, so now we're heading into chapter 13 of book 1, the concluding chapter of book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics. So in this chapter, Aristotle kind of sums up a few things and provides what we could say is the outline for the rest of the work. This entire book has been concentrating on trying to find this first principle, this starting point, or this arche of ethics. Remember, it's all about finding this good. We've talked a lot about good and how it fits and what it's supposed to be, but it's a human good. And we've got rid of that Platonic stuff, and it's all about a good that's related to us, namely this notion of happiness, which is a rough and not great translation of Aristotle's term, eudaimonia, which is the thing that we seek and makes life worth living. And the arche of ethics, the starting point, is that eudaimonia really is an activity of psyche, of soul, in accordance with arete, virtue. So psyche and arete have many meanings. So we're going to be watching Aristotle unpack psyche and arete, talking about what it is, and it's always within a very uniquely human context. Not just a human, but a uniquely human context. So that's important because remember, the activities of soul, according to Aristotle, are broad. The arete is a broad term. So lots of things can have an activity of soul. That is, animals and plants can have activities of soul, and those activities of soul, be associated with an arete, which is just simply an excellence. So we're not looking at arete in the general sense, nor psyche in the general sense, but always uniquely human. So not just a human example of an activity of soul, but something that's unique to human beings and is not shared with animals or plants, as many of our activities of soul are, like nutrition and sensation, for example. So it's unique to us. So what is the uniquely ones? And remember, these unique activities of soul, they're not really even for all humans, because the children are not going to really have these either. They have the potential for them, but not in actuality. So children have a potential for eudaimonia, but as Aristotle said, they truly cannot be happy. It's a very specialized term. They can have pleasure, they can be joyful, but not having the state or the activity of eudaimonia. So keep in mind that it's not just simply being joyful about something. That's not eudaimonia, although that, of course, is important to it, but shouldn't be identified with it. So the uniquely human part of psyche, uniquely human, is going to deal with reason. Not just that it's purely reason, but it's the one that's connected to reason. Our aspects, like right now, breathing and all the other things that according to Aristotelian biology, that my soul is doing with my body, is like something like breathing. That's not connected to reason. And it doesn't listen to reason either. However, myself, I would have a human psyche that would have particular human activities, like a little bit of reason, and my emotions. My emotions would be the activities of my soul that can listen to reason. So reason is the key element here, but reason has a couple of different ways in which it works in these activities. So the uniquely human part of the soul is under the control of reason, and reason can control in two ways. So two uniquely human activities of psyche, of soul, are ones that, these are like, you can think of them as categories or sets of activities. One is indirectly influenced by reason, one set of activities, and one is directly influenced by reason. So reason isn't necessarily completely in control of everything that's uniquely human. As a matter of fact, it's only in control of part and is more suggestive to the other part. So Aristotle says, okay, well, if we look at our arche of ethics, this main starting point, it's an activity of psyche. Well, there's two uniquely human activities, indirect with reason, direct with reason. Well, it seems that you're going to have naturally two broad categories corresponding to this of arete as well. And that's exactly what you get. So this notion of in living, having these soul activities in accordance with arete are going to have two main kinds of arete. that are uniquely human. So there's arete in the broad sense, uniquely human arete, and within the uniquely human arete, you have those excellences that are indirectly influenced by reason. Those are your character virtues. The ones that are directly influenced by reason, or maybe you could say that reason is their expressions of reason. There's a variety of ways that Aristotle puts this, but that's when you're actually doing just something that's purely reasonable, not being sort of somewhat governed by it. Those are your intellectual virtues. So, in other words, you have activities of soul. To go back, remember, we're always talking about an activity of a soul in accordance with arete. So you have certain activities of soul that are uniquely human. They're governed by reason. That's your character virtues. Certain activities of soul that are directly influenced by reason. Those are your intellectual virtues. Aristotle's going to spend a lot of time unpacking what all this means. Now, what I would like to do is end this series of lectures on Book 1 with a few reflections. As I say, some concluding reflections on Nicomachean Ethics, Book 1, because it's such a critical book. It has laid the groundwork. It's given you a pretty good idea of what the rest of the book is going to be like. We have seen that there are tensions in this. There's this divine stuff that doesn't seem to really fit all that well, but it seems to be important. We've encountered the notion of arete, virtue. We've encountered the notion of this great good that we're looking at. The goal is ultimately to unpack what eudaimonia is about. It's an activity of soul. We've seen that this activity of soul shouldn't be thought of as something, you just do all by yourself without any help. We're social creatures. We're political creatures. We've seen that ethics ultimately is a branch that leads into political thought. That why are we doing all this ethical stuff in the first place? Why are we looking at eudaimonia in the first place? Well, we're trying to figure out what makes a good life, what makes a good, happy life. And who's ultimately responsible for that? Well, it's twofold in Aristotle. You, first off, you're responsible a lot for your eudaimonia. And as we've seen, everyone, unless you're born with something terrible, everyone can pretty well get it. But of course, ultimately, the highest techne, the highest art, is the political art. So the politician, the one who runs the city, is deeply concerned with the eudaimonia of the people. So this is all, again, leading up to the master art. And remember the hierarchies of arts that Aristotle talked about way back at the beginning of Book 1. They all link up and they form hierarchies. And the notion of the greatest goods are sitting way at the top, and those are the objects of the political arts. All right, so the notion of happiness, eudaimonia, is this study of unique human virtues. But there's a couple of things that I just want to point out. The arete that are influenced by reason, one other way to think of this is that the emotions, the passions, these are part of Aristotle's story for happiness. It's by no means that you try and get rid of them. It's by no means that you allow them to dominate your life. Aristotle has what I like to call this notion of regulated emotions. The emotions and the passions are there. They are to be taught. They are to be regulated. Think about if you see a small child doing something, like a very small child, pulling legs off a spider or something like that. And we look at that and we go, oh, that's terrible. And we do tell a child, you should not do that. But we also try to educate the passions and the emotions. We say things like, you may find that fun, but you should not find that fun because you're getting enjoyment off causing pain. And we don't think that's a good thing. We say that you should learn to train your emotions where you don't enjoy that you find that unpleasant. So the sight of unnecessary pain or is not associated with any kind of pleasure, that it is associated with something of displeasure or something where you think this is not pleasure at all, and you teach the child to regulate the emotions. So the emotions and the passions are things that can be taught. In other words, they can be influenced by reason. Aristotle even compares the emotions and passions to little kids. They may not listen to you perfectly, but they can be influenced by reason. So in this sense, Aristotle is trying to carve out a kind of middle path. And we'll look more at what this middle path of Aristotle is. And we should be careful not to think that Aristotle's just advocating moderation in everything. He doesn't. But he does advocate, in a way, a kind of a middle path, and we'll unpack that in more detail later on. But this notion of regulated emotions, as I said, that the emotions can be taught, and they can be moved around, they can be somewhat controlled. They're not perfectly controllable by reason, but they can be somewhat controlled. But this notion of regulated emotions allows Aristotle, more or less, to avoid two, what I would say, extremes that you find in thinking about the emotions and about ethics. And what I'm about to say is arguably a little bit potted, but it's a little oversimplified. But I think it helps for illustrative purposes to get more, as they say, a survol, an overview of Aristotle with respect to the emotions. The first view that Aristotle is avoiding is that somehow emotions should be eliminated from ethics. That we should think about ethics really like the way that we think of like a natural science. We look for general laws, figure out what those general laws are, and then when you have a specific ethical issue or situation, you try and figure out how this particular fits under a general law. So that's really what it is. It's trying to be fairly abstract, get all the emotions out of the way, get all that stuff, and look and say, well, does this particular incident or does this particular fit under this general law or that general law? So it's really, shall we say, paring back experience and getting the emotions out and trying to cleanse experience and perform something abstract in it. And Aristotle is saying that's not what I'm trying to do. Now, the other side, and that view actually leads more or less into a Kantian style of ethics, where it's a very sort of logical kind of structure, much like mathematics or like a science, as we would think of it today, not science in the ancient way. The other one, instead of becoming an ethical person by, becoming really abstract, having an abstract view, you become an ethical person, or ethical views or the passions are just simply, they're the foundations of ethics. That really all ethics is just an expression of passion. That passions are not things to be taught. They're the teachers. They get you going about things. If you want to get people to do or be ethical, you just concentrate on the passions. And besides, at the end of the day, you can think of the certain schools in the early 20th century, like emotivism. They said, look, at the end of the day, there's no such thing as an ethical judgment in a logical sense. An ethical statement is just an emotion. It's an emotive. Emotivism was the name of the school. And that's all really ethics is about, is just how you happen to feel and express those feelings. So the differences between emotional judgments are not really cognitive, like mathematical judgments. They're just, I like or dislike. I sometimes have called these sort of buttermilk judgments, where you like something and that's your ethical approval, and you dislike something, that's your ethical disapproval. So we translate this sort of semi-cognitive notion of ethics into the language of emotions. And emotions are just the story. There's nothing else to tell. Another version of this is when this stress on the emotions is, whatever you happen to feel is whatever you feel, and that's okay. Again, Aristotle would be resistant to this, right? As I gave you in the little spider example, there are clear examples where we do say, Aristotle would point out, we don't say whatever you happen to feel is just fine. If I always imagine Aristotle, if he were a modern counselor, he would probably be quite shocking, because he would probably be telling a lot of people what you're feeling is wrong, and you have to go and think about your passions and educate them, much like we educate children's passions in that sort of grisly example about pulling legs off spiders. So these extremes, they show this sort of formalism, Kantianism, abstractive, stoic kind of approach to ethics. That's not Aristotle. The other side, where passions really run the show, everything, passions dominate everything, is reminiscent of the great philosopher David Hume, who said, reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions. That's not Aristotle either. So Aristotle is offering us this kind of a middle ground. Once again, everything is a balance. You have to balance your emotions. Now, they're not on equal footing with reason. Remember, arete here is sometimes is indirectly influenced by reason. So your character virtues are not just passions gone wild, they're indirectly or at least somewhat controlled. So the idea of a balance with reason is running the show, but maybe more of a suggestive way in terms of achieving a balance with the emotions. But reason is still ultimately in control of the ship, so to speak. So Aristotle is offering us a middle road. He's offering us one that he thinks conforms to the way we actually think about what the good life is, and being happy. I'm going to use the term happy now for a bit, but Aristotle is really saying if you want to be happy, it is an activity. You have to work at it. It's not going to be handed to you. And there are things you need. You have to have certain social circumstances. You got to have a friend or two. You got to have some external goods. You've got to shape your own life. There's a certain sense of personal responsibility. It does not arise from chance. It's a great state. It's a blessed state. But it is something that you have to work at it. And it's a balance that is not just a balance like a static balance. It's a dynamic balance because life has all kinds of things it throws at you, and you have to be able to recover from these things and keep the balance in different situations. So the notion of a balance here in Aristotle with the intellectual side of the intellectual virtues and the other side of the character virtues, this balance is dynamic. It's always going to be changing because life is changing. Now, so the happy life, the true life of eudaimonia, is going to be a fairly difficult one. But it is what gives life meaning, and it is something that in which we find fulfillment and makes us choose life. Yes, this is why I would want to live. This is what I'm living for, is to achieve this. So, what exactly are these activities of soul? What exactly are these arete and these character virtues? Well, liberality, moderation for the character virtues, intellectual virtues, wisdom, comprehension. What rules govern them, or do rules govern them? How is that all going to work? And do the same rules govern both of these? And the answer to that is no. So we have to be careful about all the things that Aristotle so far hasn't said. And he hasn't told us exactly really what these activities are and really what arete or virtue is. But that is the goal of the rest of the books of the Nicomachean Ethics, basically to flesh out this arche of ethics and to ultimately unpack the notion of eudaimonia. So that concludes Book 1. Stay tuned.